Welcome, friends. I'm Dr. Dave Lehman, and I'm presenting the real history of socialism today. We're going to start at the very beginning. During the 3rd century BC, King Chandragupta ruled the Maurya Empire. This was the largest empire in the world. His political advisor, Kautilya, also called Chanakya, utilized mafia-style tactics to the extent he was described as India's Machiavelli. Kautilya counseled the king to use spies to create crises of rivalry where subjects would fight among themselves, allowing him to usurp control. Some people wonder, is there any other book that talks so openly about when using violence is justified? The book tells when assassinating an enemy is useful, when killing domestic opponents is wise, how one uses secret agents, when one needs to sacrifice one's own secret agent. How can the king use women and children as spies and even assassins? When should a nation violate a treaty and invade its neighbor? Kautilya addressed all those questions. In what case must a king spy on his own people? How should a king test his ministers, even his own family members, to see if they're worthy of trust? When must a king kill a prince, his own son, who is heir to the throne? How does one protect a king from poison? What precautions must a king take against assassination by one's own wife? When is it appropriate to arrest a troublemaker on suspicion alone? When is torture justified? At some point, one would wonder, is there any question that Kautilya found immoral, too terrible to ask in a book? Actually, there is none. Machiavelli wrote that in politics, one must consider the final result. In other words, the end justifies the means. Standards of right and wrong are subject to what benefits those in power. Since every criminal and ambitious politician defines good as what benefits themselves or their agenda, therefore it gives them license license to lie under oath, deceitfully usurp freedoms, commit the most horrible injustices and atrocities. The end of one prince controlling all of India was such a good end that any means necessary to get there was justified. According to Machiavelli, if a prince wanted to conquer a city in quest to unify Italy, the people would hate him. But if the prince secretly paid agitators, criminals under the table to burn barns, kill cows, smash windows, and set buildings on fire, thus creating crises and terror in the streets, the people would cry out for help. The prince would come in and get rid of the useful idiot criminals he had paid, and nobody would be the better for it. The naive citizens, unaware of the subterfuge, would praise him as a hero. Hitler used brown shirts to create crises by disrupting the meetings of his opponents. Then once in power, Hitler had the brown shirts killed in the Night of the Long Knives, and the people praised Hitler for restoring order. In numerous Democrat-running cities across America, homeless persons are allowed to camp in the streets. During the COVID pandemic, these cities released criminals, including MS-13 gang members who illegally crossed borders or ISIS members who accompanied unvetted Middle Eastern immigrants. Soon, crime increased, compounded by defunding the police. COVID responses also closed schools, releasing high school and college students indoctrinated with hate America views and organized by leftist professors to participate in indivisible Antifa protests. COVID responses also included the unprecedented shutting down of small businesses. When businesses are shut down, some people lose their livelihood. Many of these people decide to leave, especially if they have children or small business owners. And if the churches are shut down, the pro-life conservatives would have difficulty organizing. Statistically, pro-life, pro-family, pro-business citizens are a higher percentage Republican. If these people leave, who's left in the cities? Republicans leave and Democrats end up with a monopoly on the city politics. Voter fraud is more easily feasible in such a situation. In elections, whoever wins the big cities wins the state, and whoever wins the state gets all the electoral votes for the state, and the president is elected by electoral votes. There's a clear Democratic political advantage to having crime and unemployment go on up in the big cities. The end justifies the means. In the 19th century, social contract without God turned into socialism, where the state becomes God. Hegel taught the state is God walking on earth. We must worship the state. All the worth which a human possesses, he possesses only through the state. The state recognizes no authority but its own. acknowledges no abstract rules of good or bad. The state is the ultimate end, which has the highest right against the individual, whose highest duty is to be a member of the state. The nation state is therefore the absolute power on earth. Hegel was against citizens ruling themselves. He wanted power to be in the hands of one person. Students at the University of Berlin who admired Hegel formed a radical student group called the Young Hegelians, a member of which was Karl Marx. Karl Marx got his idea of government as God from Hegel. Machiavellian capitalizing on the crisis to consolidate control has been adapted by Hegel into Hegelian dialectics. Hegel's dialectic struggle influenced Darwin as a development of the theory of evolution and its survival of the fittest, and Hitler, who titled his book Mein Kampf, My Struggle. Karl Marx translated Hegelian dialectics into a political application where people who are accepting the status quo, that's the thesis, are subjected to a created crisis that is really bad, that's the antithesis, so that they will be relieved to surrender their freedoms for a solution that's only half as bad, the synthesis. Early synthesis then becomes the new thesis, and the process is repeated until all power is voluntarily relinquished by the people into the hands of a dictator who promises big government solutions. And to create an antithesis, there needs to be division in society. As Fidel Castro, the leader of the communist Cuba, would explain, the revolution needs an enemy. The revolution needs for its development its antithesis. If enemies were lacking, they had to be fabricated. To create division, citizens must be made to stop thinking themselves as citizens, but instead to be identified with subgroups, which are pitted against each other to create division, the antithesis. Subgroups can be social, ethnic, racial, sexual, economic, or religious. David Horowitz explained, an SDS radical once wrote, "The issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution." In other words, civil rights, women's rights is never really the issue. Women, blacks, they're only instruments in a larger cause, which is power. Battles over rights and other issues, according to Alinsky, should never be seen as more than occasions to advance the real agenda, which is accumulation of power. The American Negro is nothing but a political football, and which white liberals control through false promises. Once the country is divided into subgroups or victims and oppressors, haves or have-nots, crisis incidents could be manufactured between them to destabilize the nation. When the people panic and fear, they surrender their freedoms to whoever promises to restore order. Marx's plan included a progressive income tax with everyone working for the state. All inheritances and private property would be confiscated, and there would be centralized government control of land, banking, communication, and transportation. Education would not only be free, but mandatory as a means of indoctrination. Marx applied Darwin's theory of evolution politically, believing that socialism is just a lower stage of communism, that socialism would eventually evolve into communism, and communism is the destination. Socialism is the road to get there. The difference between socialism and communism is simply one of degrees. Marx's philosophy influenced Vladimir Lenin's Social Democrat Party, Joseph Stalin's Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Benito Mussolini's Italian Socialist Party, Mao Zedong's Socialist Education Movement, the Communist Party of China, and Adolf Hitler's National Socialist Workers' Party. 2 months after Communist People's Republic of Romania was established, Pastor Richard Wurmbrand was arrested, labeled prisoner number 1. He was locked in a solitary cell where he endured horrendous torture at the hands of the brutal secret police. He wrote a book called Marx and Satan. Marx wished to draw the whole of mankind into a pit reserved for the devil and his angels. He got this from reading one of his Bibles of one of his parents. Marx had loved the words of Mephistopheles in Faust, "Everything in existence is worth being destroyed," everything, including the proletariat and the comrades. Marx quoted these words, Stalin acted on them, and destroyed even his own family. In his poem, Human Pride, Marx admits that his aim is not to improve the world, reform, or revolutionize it, but simply to ruin it and enjoy it being ruined. Marx's correspondence with his father testifies to his squandering great sums of money on pleasures and his constant quarreling with parental authority about this and other matters. Then he fell in with the tenets of a highly secret satanic church and received the rites of initiation. Satan, whom his worshippers see in their hallucinatory orgies, speaks through them. Thus, Marx is only Satan's mouthpiece when he utters in his poem Invocation to One in Despair the words, "I wish to avenge myself against the one who rules above." Lenin forced Tsar from power, who was soon shot along with his family. Lenin convinced Russian military leaders that if they did not defend the Tsar, that he would give them positions in the new government. When they arrived expecting to receive posts of responsibility, Lenin had them shot. Lenin followed the example of France's Reign of Terror, arresting and executing tens of thousands in mass killings during the Red Terror of 1918. Lenin sent a telegram to his socialist revolutionaries in the city of Nizhny Novgorod, which I've been to, with instructions to introduce mass terror. He instituted a policy of dekulakization, the intentional killing off of millions of middle-class kulak farmers and small businessmen, as they were the only ones with resources to challenge his power. Lenin claimed to be champion of the common workers, called the proletariat, by completely eliminating the middle class, the bourgeois, stating that the way to crush the bourgeois is to grind them between the millstones of taxation and inflation. Lenin wrote in his book State and Revolution in 1917, the dictatorship of the proletariat will produce a series of restrictions of liberty. In the case of capitalists, we must crush them. Their resistance must be broken by force. There must be violence. There cannot be any liberty or democracy. Lenin instructed his comrades, the kulak uprising in your 5 districts must be crushed without pity. You must make examples of these people. Hang, and I mean publicly hang these people so the people can see at least 100 kulaks, rich bastards, known bloodsuckers. Publish their names, seize their grain, single out their hostages per my instructions in yesterday's telegram. Do all this so for miles around, people will see it, understand it, and tremble. Do all this so that people will tell themselves that we are killing the bloodthirsty kulaks and that we will continue to do so. Yours, P.S., find tougher people. Lenin had not anticipated that killing off the kulaks farmers would devastate food production. As a result, he created a horrendous national famine in 1922 to 1923, in which an estimated 5 million starved to death. Lenin killed some of his own followers, writing in Party Organization and Party Literature on November 13, 1905, the party would inevitably break up if it did not cleanse itself of people advocating anti-party views. George Orwell explained Bolsheviks could not have retained power without most rigorous and truly iron discipline in their party. In 1924, after years of tormenting headaches, Lenin died. Though he and Stalin had been clearly political opponents, Stalin doctored a fake photo and circulated to make it look as if he and Lenin were good friends. Stalin rewrote history, tearing down statues and renaming streets, museums, and ships, even changing the name of St. Petersburg to Leningrad. Under Stalin's iron fist of Soviet dictatorship, privacy was non-existent. The press was censored, free speech disappeared, healthcare was rationed, economy was regulated, private industry was collectivized, political dissent was punished, media and entertainment were propagandized, children's education became indoctrination, marriage and families were subject to social engineering, religion was suppressed, and human life was valued only by its usefulness to the Soviet society. To stay in power, Stalin conducted purges and orchestrated famines, resulting in an estimated 40 million deaths. Fear and food were tools of control. People were kept in constant fear that the government agencies monitoring them would falsely accuse them and drag them away in the night, and people were kept in continual food shortage so they could not have the resources to rebel. Stalin engineered a food shortage that killed millions of anti-Stalinist peasants. Biden said there would be a food shortage, and Bill Gates has bought, along with Chinese, huge amounts of American farmland. You can see what they're doing. Kamala said that we will have to reduce our consumption of red meat. Richard Pipes discussed in Communism and History, to break the resistance of the peasants in the Ukraine, the North Caucasus, and the Kazakhstan, Stalin inflicted on these areas in 1932 and 33 an artificial famine, shipping out all the food from the entire districts and deploying the army to prevent the starving peasants from migrating in search of nourishment. It was estimated that between 6 and 7 million people perished in this man-made catastrophe. In his Great Purge of 1936 to 38, Stalin executed an estimated 1 million Communist Party members, government officials, military leaders, and peasants who were accused of being disloyal. One of those arrested under Stalin's regime was Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He was born December 11, 1918. He was detained for writing a letter criticizing Stalin and spent 11 years in Gulag labor camp. He began secretly compiling horror stories of life in the gulags. For several years of his imprisonment, from 1947 to 1952, he was denied paper and pen. So he composed and memorized chapters as poems. He put these accounts into his book, The First Circle, in 1968, and then the Gulag Archipelago. An archipelago is a chain of islands in the ocean, and Solzhenitsyn used this metaphor to describe a chain of FEMA-style citizen detention camps across Russia. Horrendous camps were also used by Hitler's Nationalist Socialist Workers' Party, Pol Pot's Communist Khmer Rouge, Communist Chinese, and North Korea. Alexander Solzhenitsyn's writings were smuggled out of the Soviet Union and translated. They quickly became internationally popular, leading to him to receive the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1970, even though he was still in the USSR. He wrote his Nobel Prize acceptance letter. During all the years until 1961, not only was I convinced I should never see a single line of mine in print in my lifetime, but also I scarcely had written because I feared this would become known. International pressure led to Solzhenitsyn's being expelled from Russia in 1974. Warning naive American students of the horrible realities of socialism, Alexander Solzhenitsyn stated in Washington, D.C. on June 30th, 1975, in the pre-revolutionary Russia, there were attempts at the Tsar's life. During these years, about 17 persons a year were executed. The Cheka, Lenin's communist secret police, in 1918 and 1919 executed without trial more than 1,000 persons per month. At the height of Stalin's terror in 1937 to 38, more than 40,000 persons were shot per month. Solzhenitsyn addressed Harvard June 8, 1978. He said, "In Soviet society, there is a multitude of prisoners in our camps who are termed criminals, but most of them never committed any crime. They merely tried to defend themselves against a lawless state by resorting to means outside the legal framework." Solzhenitsyn explained how government-run healthcare provided cover for Stalin's political opponents to be diagnosed with psychiatric problems and given compulsory treatment. Over there, people are groaning and dying in these psychiatric hospitals. Doctors are making their evening rounds, injecting people with drugs which destroy their brain. There are tens of thousands of political prisoners in our country under compulsory psychiatric treatment. Near the end of World War II and declining health, President Roosevelt attended the Tehran Conference and the Yalta Conference, where he surrendered half of Europe to the iron-fisted control of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, led by the communist dictator Stalin. Communists replaced Christian religion with materialistic atheism. Church property was confiscated or destroyed. Free speech and free press were prohibited. Private property was abolished. Marxist John Dewey invited the Frankfurt School over to this country in 1933. It was a Marxist splinter group of leftist pseudo-intellectuals, many of them Jewish atheists, trying mainly by means of the so-called Long March through the institutions to corrupt traditional Christian values in Western culture. Their ultimate goal has been to take over countries, not with guns and ammunition and weapons, but with pseudo-values and ideas that would change the way people think, which would be in line with communist directives, destroying free enterprise capitalism by undermining its economic engine, the middle class, destruction of the basic building block of society, the family unit, and destroying Judeo-Christian values. Significant members were Herbert Marcuse, who used money from the Marxist Rockefeller Foundation to put in place Marxist administrators and professors in universities, Harvard, Yale, Princeton. And these Marxist professors would hire administrators, hire Marxist professors, and Marxist professors would hire associate professors and graduate students who were also in that, believe in that sort of Marxist agenda. And Willie Musenberg, he was dispatched to pursue Hollywood and also Australia with this Marxist agenda. Using money from the Rockefeller Foundation, they bought up 25 of the leading newspapers in America, installed Marxist editors in chief who would hire Marxist writers, who again would hire Marxist um, other other writers, leading writers. This permeated the Department of Education, TV, radio, newspapers, magazines, movies, which influence the way people think. Why do you think we teach only evolution in our universities and colleges, graduate schools throughout our country? Evolution is simply a way of explaining things without God. He said we must organize the individuals to use them to make up Western civilization stink. Only then, after we've corrupted all of its values and made life impossible, can we impose dictatorship of the proletariat. Herbert Hoover warned at a reception on his 80th birthday in West Branch, Iowa, on August 10th, 1954. He says, I have witnessed on the ground 20 nations, the workings of the philosophy of the Antichrist Karl Marx. There rises constantly in my mind the forces which make for progress and those which may corrode away the safeguards of freedom in America. I want to say something, not in the tones of Jeremiah, but in the spirit of St. Paul. Our founding fathers did not invent the priceless boon of individual freedom and respect for human dignity of men. The great gift to mankind sprang from the Creator and not from governments. Today, the socialist virus and poison gas generated by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels have spread into every nation on earth. Their dogma is absolute materialism, which defies truth and religious faith. A nation is strong or weak. It thrives or perishes upon what it believes to be true. If our youth are rightly instructed in the faith of our fathers, then our power will be strong. To this whole gamut of socialist infections, I say to you, God has blessed us with another wonderful word, heritage. The great documents of that heritage are not from Karl Marx. They are from the Bible, the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution of the United States. Within them alone can the safeguards of freedom survive. In 1973, since 1973, we have murdered 4,000 babies a day in the womb of their mothers, totaling over 60 million, and their blood cries out for vengeance. We consume more than 1/2 of the world's illegal drugs, yet constitute only 5% of the world's population. We spend $2.8 billion per year on internet pornography, which is more than half the worldwide total of $4.9 billion. Our rate of cohabiting partners has increased tenfold since 1960, totaling over 12 million unmarried partners today. Our divorce rate is the highest of any nation. 40% of our children are born to unmarried women. We spend over $100 billion per year on gambling, mostly from the poor who can't afford it. Our nation has become a debt junkie, leading the world in both government and personal debt. The blasphemy of God's name is commonplace in our society. 17.6 million Americans are alcoholics. During the Obama and Biden administrations, we have forsaken the nation of Israel. God told Abraham, the father of the Jews, I will bless them who bless you and curse them who curse you. We have become a nation whose culture is the antithesis of Christian culture. Therefore, we're living in a post-Christian nation. Jim Garlow, pastor of Skyline Church in La Mesa, California, and an expert on church history, has laid out a sweeping overview of the relationship between Bible-believing Christians and the American culture over the centuries. From 1607 to 1833, Christianity was the established culture in our land. That's 236 years. From 1833 to 1918, Christianity was a predominant force. That's 85 years. From 1918 to 1968, Christianity was a subdominant force. That's 50 years. From 1968 to 1988, Christianity was a subculture. That's 20 years. 1988 to 1998, Christianity was a counterculture. That's 10 years. From 1998 to 2008, Christianity is an antithetical culture. 10 years. And from 2008 to the present, Christianity is now a persecuted culture. Clarence Mannion, Dean of Notre Dame Law School, was chosen by President Dwight D. Eisenhower to chair a commission to return the state's powers that had been usurped by the federal government during Roosevelt's New Deal era. Eisenhower, unfortunately, was persuaded to decline Mannion's recommendations in favor of Republican big government. Mannion was released from the administration, but continued his cause, writing his book, The Constitution of the United States versus Communism, in November 19th of 1962. He wrote, never before in the history of human race has atheism, naked, materialistic, power-hungry, activated atheism, ever mounted his horse and started to ride across the world and do so successfully. Communism is this activation of atheism. This is the personalization of anti-God. This is Armageddon. And anybody in this room who has a shred of belief in God or immorality or in his or her personal responsibility must recognize that the understanding and defeat of communism is the first order of business on the part of everybody who has a shred of interest in the perpetuation of Christian civilization. This thing must be destroyed. Mannion pioneered conservative talk radio, and during the 1950s and 60s, influencing Governor Ronald Reagan, Governor Douglas MacArthur, Jesse Helms, Strom Thurmond, Harry Byrd, Barry Goldwater, even Phyllis Schlafly. The Cold War was at its height in 1947 to 1991, with nuclear attacks prevented by mutually assured destruction. MAD countries experienced their political parties infiltrated, communist parties being established, coup d'etat plots to remove leaders and military conquests. During this time, 45 countries became communist satellites, often with brutal purges which killed millions. Countries included Afghanistan, Albania, Angola, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Bosnia, Bulgaria, Cambodia, China, Congo, Cuba, Croatia, Czech Republic, East Germany, Egypt, Estonia, Ethiopia, Georgia, Herzegovina, Indonesia, Hungary, Kazakhstan, Laos, Latvia, Lebanon, Lithuania, Macedonia, Moldova, Mongolia, Montenegro, Mozambique, Nicaragua, North Korea, Poland, Romania, Russia, Serbia, Slovakia, Slovenia, Somalia, South Yemen, Syria, Tajikistan, Tibet, Ukraine, Vietnam, Yemen, and Yugoslavia. The main takeover tactic was this: find groups within the country with grievances, organize these groups to protest and riot, escalate riots to violence and bloodshed, bribe, threaten, and co-opt media to control the narrative of blaming the existing leadership. In the midst of national confusion, carry out a coup or rigged election, overthrowing the country's representative government and replacing it with a totalitarian dictatorship. Citizens are initially relieved that order is restored, but when the dust settles, they are rude awakening to find their freedoms gone. The USSR's Committee for State Security, that KGB, organized clandestine opposition groups to destabilize pro-Western countries. Karl Marx is attributed with saying, accuse the victim of what you do. Guilty candidates accuse their opponents of the unethical acts that they are committing. If you're a liar, accuse your opponent of it. If you're racist, accuse your opponent of it. If you're intolerant, accuse your opponent of it. If you're hateful, accuse your opponent. If you're engaged in voter fraud, accuse your opponent of it. If you're engaged in criminal acts, accuse your opponent. The New York Times reported cash flow of the Clinton Foundation amid Russian uranium deal. Yet her opponent was accused of colluding with Russia. In Chicago, there was an old tradition of throwing a brick through your own campaign office window and then calling the press conference to say that you've been attacked. The innocent candidate is put on the defensive as media repeats the accusation, implanting negative word association in voters' minds. No one gets a second chance to make a first impression. In Acts 24, those who stirred up a riot against the Apostle Paul were being responsible for it. Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, "We have found this man a pestilent fellow, a mover of sedition among the Jews, a ringleader of the sect of Nazarenes, who has gone about to profane the temple." So the idea is, woe to him that calls good evil and evil good. Isaiah 5, verse 20. Though they call the countries republics, they're ruled by dictators who punish those who threaten their power, such as Stalin, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, Castro, Ho Chi Minh, Tito, Xi Jinping, Daniel Ortega, Nicolas Maduro, Erdogan, Kim Jong-un, and others. These leaders may have a friendly sounding title such as president, chairman, prime minister, comrade, head of state, but they're effectively function as monarchs. No one dare cross them or their families. They're the ones who decide what are the party views, and they demand enforcement with iron discipline. There may be elections for the sake of show, but opposition is suppressed. The media is manipulated. Outcomes are predetermined. In 1937, Imperial Japanese soldiers massacred over 300,000 in Nanking, China. The pro-American general Chiang Kai-shek and the Army of the Republic of China fought both Imperial Japan on one side and Mao Zedong's Communist People's Republic of China on the other. In 1946, President Truman cut off aid to Chiang Kai-shek. This allowed the Communist Party leader Mao Zedong to gain strength and drive Chiang Kai-shek's army out of mainland China onto the island of Taiwan. Mao Zedong implemented Cultural Revolution, followed by numerous purges, which resulted in an estimated of 80 million deaths of his own people. Eisenhower stated in Time magazine in 1952, China has lost to the free world in one of the greatest international disasters of our time, a type of tragedy which must not be repeated. Mao Zedong stated, Chinese socialism is founded upon Darwin and the theory of evolution. Obviously, that explains things without a God. Reagan stated in Beijing, China, April 27, 1984, I have seen the rise of fascism and communism. Both philosophies glorify arbitrary power of the state, but both theories fail. Both deny those God-given liberties that are the inalienable right of each person on this planet. Indeed, they deny the existence of God.